The rain came down hard that Tuesday morning in Seattle. Daniel was running late again, which seemed to be his normal routine these days. He clutched his briefcase tight and dodged puddles as he rushed down the sidewalk toward his office building. At 34 years old, he'd finally made partner at the law firm, something he'd worked toward for nearly a decade. His phone kept buzzing with messages from clients, his assistant, and his husband reminding him about dinner plans that evening. Daniel barely noticed the people around him as he walked. The city was crowded as always, full of people trying to get to work, tourists taking photos, and the usual mix of street performers and folks asking for spare change. He'd lived in Seattle for 6 years now, and he'd gotten used to keeping his head down and moving fast. That's just how city life worked. But something made him slow down that morning. Maybe it was the way the older man was sitting against the brick wall of the old building. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in how he held himself despite the worn-out blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Or maybe it was something Daniel couldn't quite name, something that felt almost like a whisper in the back of his mind telling him to look. The man appeared to be in his early 60s, though life on the streets had probably made him look older than he really was. His hair was gray and long, tied back in a ponytail that had seen better days. He wore a military jacket that was faded and torn at the edges, and his weathered face told stories of years spent outdoors in all kinds of weather. In front of him sat a cardboard sign with simple words written in black marker. "Veteran, anything helps. God bless." Daniel stopped walking. People flowed around him like water around a rock, some giving him annoyed looks for blocking the sidewalk. But he couldn't move. He stood there staring at this stranger, feeling the strangest sensation wash over him. It was like looking at an old photograph that's been sitting in a drawer for years, something familiar but just out of reach in your memory. The homeless man looked up, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. The man's eyes were a striking blue-gray, and there was something in them that made Daniel's chest feel tight. Not pity or sadness exactly, but recognition. Like somehow, impossibly, they knew each other. Daniel's phone buzzed again, breaking the spell. He blinked and looked down at the screen. 3 missed calls from the office. He was now officially very late for an important client meeting. He should run. He should apologize and move on with his day. That's what the old Daniel would have done, the Daniel who'd learned to keep moving forward and not look back. But something held him there. Maybe it was the way the man had looked at him, not with the desperate pleading he'd seen from others on the street, but with a kind of quiet acceptance, like he'd long ago stopped expecting anything good to happen. That look broke something in Daniel's heart. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. It wasn't much, not really, but it was what he had in cash. He bent down and placed it carefully in the paper cup beside the man. Their hands almost touched, and Daniel felt that strange feeling again, stronger this time, like electricity, like déjà vu, like something important was happening but he couldn't understand what. "Thank you," the man said. His voice was rough, probably from years of cold nights and not enough water, but there was warmth in it. "Thank you, son." The word son hit Daniel harder than it should have. He nodded quickly, unable to speak, and turned to hurry away. As he walked, he kept looking back over his shoulder. The man had gone back to watching the street, that cardboard sign propped against his knee, waiting for the next person who might stop. Daniel couldn't focus during his meeting. He kept thinking about those eyes, that face, the strange pull he'd felt standing there in the rain. His colleague asked him twice if he was okay, and he mumbled something about not sleeping well. It wasn't exactly a lie. He'd been having strange dreams lately, fragmented memories from childhood that didn't quite make sense. During lunch, Daniel sat alone in his office and pulled up something he hadn't looked at in months. It was a digital copy of an old photograph, the only one he had from before his adoption. The picture was faded and damaged, taken on a cheap camera sometime in the late 90s. In it, a young woman held a small boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The boy was Daniel. The woman was his mother, though he barely remembered her face anymore. He'd been 8 when the Chen family adopted him. They'd given him everything, love and support and opportunities he never would have had otherwise. They'd encouraged him to keep his first name Daniel, while taking their last name. They'd never tried to erase his past, But they also couldn't fill in the blank spaces in his memory. Daniel remembered fragments: a small apartment that always smelled like cigarette smoke, his mother's tired smile, eating cereal for dinner sometimes because that's all they had, and something else, something that danced just out of reach in his mind. A voice, someone older, someone who'd read him stories and made him laugh. He zoomed in on the photograph, studying his mother's face. She'd died when he was 7. He knew that much from the social workers. After that came foster care, then the Chens, then the life he had now. But there was so much he didn't know, so much that had been lost or sealed away in adoption records he'd never been able to access. His phone rang, pulling him back to the present. It was his husband, asking if he wanted Thai food or Italian for dinner. Daniel answered on autopilot, his mind still wandering back to that man on the street. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Daniel went through the motions, responding to emails, making phone calls, pretending everything was normal. But inside, something had shifted. That brief moment on the sidewalk had opened a door in his mind, one he'd kept carefully closed for years. When 5 o'clock finally came, Daniel packed up his things and headed out. Instead of going straight to his car, he found himself walking back toward Pioneer Square. He told himself he was being ridiculous. The man probably wouldn't even be there anymore. Street folks moved around, found different spots, went to shelters when it got too cold. But as Daniel rounded the corner, he saw the familiar military jacket, the cardboard sign, the weathered face. The man was still there, settling in for what would probably be a cold night. Fewer people were on the streets now that rush hour had passed. The rain had stopped, but the temperature was dropping. Daniel walked right past him. He got halfway, down the block before he stopped. Standing there in the gathering darkness, wrestling with feelings he couldn't name, finally he turned around and walked back. The man looked up, surprised to see him again. "Hey," Daniel said, his voice uncertain. "Have you eaten today?" The man studied him for a long moment. "Why do you care?" It was a fair question. Daniel didn't have a good answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just do." Something changed in the man's expression. Not hope exactly, but maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. "There's a soup kitchen a couple blocks down," he said. "But they're closed now." Daniel made a decision. "Come on," he said. "Let me buy you some real food. There's a diner around the corner." The man didn't move. "Why?" he asked again. Daniel looked at him, really looked at him, and felt that pull again, that sense of something important just beyond his understanding. "Because I think we need to talk," he said. And somehow, impossibly, the man seemed to understand. He slowly got to his feet, gathering his things, and together they walked toward the warm lights of the diner, two strangers connected by something neither of them could yet explain. The diner wasn't fancy, just one of those old-style places with cracked vinyl booths and a counter where tired waitresses poured endless coffee. But it was warm and dry, and the smell of burgers and fries filled the air. Daniel led the way to a booth in the back corner, away from the curious stares of the other customers. The older man sat down slowly, like his joints hurt. He placed his worn backpack carefully beside him, keeping one hand on it like someone who'd learned not to trust that his belongings would stay safe. A waitress came over, her name tag reading Betty. She didn't bat an eye at the man's appearance, just smiled and asked what they wanted. "Coffee," the man said quietly. "Please." "2 coffees," Daniel added. "And can we get a minute to look at the menu?" After Betty left, an awkward silence settled over the booth. Daniel realized he didn't even know where to start. What do you say to a homeless stranger you've invited to dinner because of some weird feeling you can't explain? The man spoke first. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Daniel said. "But here we are." A small smile crossed the man's weathered face. "Here we are." He picked up the menu, studying it like it was written in another language. Daniel realized he was probably trying to find the cheapest thing, the way people do when they're not used to having choices. "Order whatever you want," Daniel said firmly. "I mean it." When Betty came back, the man ordered a burger, fries, and a piece of apple pie. Daniel got the same, though he wasn't particularly hungry. He was too busy trying to figure out why he felt so drawn to this stranger. "I'm Daniel," he said, extending his hand across the table. The man hesitated, looking at his own dirty hands, but then shook Daniel's firmly. "Robert," he said. "Robert Sullivan." "How long have you been out there, Robert?" Daniel asked gently. Robert stared into his coffee cup. "Going on 3 years now. Lost my apartment, lost my job, lost pretty much everything." He looked up. "I'm a veteran. Did 2 tours overseas. Came back different than I left, you know? Couldn't hold things together after that." Daniel nodded. He'd heard similar stories before, read articles about veterans struggling with PTSD, falling through the cracks of a system that should have caught them. But hearing it from Robert made it real in a way statistics never could. "Where are you from originally?" Daniel asked. "Portland. Grew up there, or tried to anyway. Bounced around foster homes most of my childhood." Robert took a sip of coffee and Daniel noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "What about you? You got that look of someone who's done well for himself." "I'm a lawyer," Daniel admitted. "Corporate law mostly. Boring stuff with contracts and mergers." He paused. "And yeah, I grew up in foster care too. Until I was 8 anyway. Then I got adopted." Robert's head snapped up, his blue-gray eyes suddenly intense. "Foster care? Here in Seattle?" "No, Portland, actually. Small world, right?" Daniel felt that strange sensation again, stronger now. "I was in the system for about a year after my mom died. Then the Chen family adopted me and we moved up here when I was 12. The food arrived and they both ate in silence for a few minutes. Daniel watched Robert savor every bite like it was the best meal he'd ever had. It probably had been, at least in a long while. "What was your name?" Robert asked suddenly. "Before you were adopted, I mean." "Did they change it?" "Just my last name. I was Daniel Sullivan, then I became Daniel Chen." He pulled out his phone, scrolling to that old photograph. "This is the only picture I have from back then. That's my mom and me, probably around 1998 or 1999. Robert reached for the phone with trembling hands. He stared at the photo for so long that Daniel started to worry. When Robert finally looked up, his eyes were wet with tears. "Linda," Robert whispered. Her name was Linda Sullivan. Daniel felt the world tilt. "How do you know that?" "Because she was my mother too." Robert's voice cracked. "That's my baby brother in this picture. That's you." For a moment, Daniel couldn't breathe. The diner seemed to fade away, all the sounds becoming distant and muffled. He looked at Robert's face, really looked at it, and suddenly he could see it. The same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. The same shape of the jaw. The same way of tilting his head when confused. "You're lying," Daniel said, but there was no force behind it. "You have to be." Robert shook his head, tears running down his weathered cheeks. "I'm not. I swear I'm not. I've been looking for you for 25 years, kid. I never stopped looking. But how? Why didn't you?" Daniel's mind was racing, memories flooding back. A bedroom he'd shared with someone. A bigger kid who'd taught him to tie his shoes. Someone who'd made him laugh when their mom was sad. "Bobby? They called you Bobby?" "Yeah," Robert said, his voice breaking. "Yeah, they did. And you were Danny. You couldn't say Daniel yet, so you called yourself Danny." Daniel's hands were shaking now, too. "You used to read me books, Dr. Seuss. Green Eggs and Ham was my favorite." "You made me read it 5 times every night," Robert said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Drove me crazy, but I did it anyway." The memories were coming faster now, breaking through years of fog. Robert had been 18 when their mom died. He'd tried to take care of Daniel, tried to keep them together, but he was barely an adult himself. The state had separated them. Different foster homes. And then Daniel had been adopted, his record sealed, his last name changed. "I looked everywhere," Robert said. "I mean everywhere. But they wouldn't tell me anything. Said it was for your own good, that you had a new family and I shouldn't disrupt that. I even hired a private investigator once. Used up all my savings, but the adoption was sealed tight. You just disappeared." Daniel thought about his own life, the years of wondering about his past, the blank spaces in his memory. "I tried to find information too," he admitted. "About our mom, about what happened. But there was nothing. The Chens told me what they knew, but it wasn't much." "She loved you," Robert said quietly. "Mom loved you so much. She was sick for a long time and she knew she wasn't going to make it. She made me promise to take care of you. And I failed. I failed her and I failed you. No, Daniel said firmly. You were 18. You were a kid yourself. None of this was your fault. They sat there in that diner booth. Two brothers who'd been lost to each other for a quarter century, trying to process the impossible reunion happening over cold fries and lukewarm coffee. What happened to you? Daniel asked. After I was adopted? Robert's face darkened. I was angry. So angry at everyone. Joined the army thinking it would give me structure, purpose, you know? And it did for a while. But then I got deployed. Saw things I can't unsee, did things I can't undo. Came back with PTSD and nobody knew how to handle it, including me. Started drinking to quiet the noise in my head. Lost jobs, lost friends. Eventually lost my apartment, and you ended up on the streets. Yeah, 3 years ago I ran out of options. Or maybe I ran out of fight. Some days I'm not sure which. Robert looked down at his hands. I'm not the brother you deserve, Danny. Look at me. I'm a mess. Daniel reached across the table and grabbed Robert's hand. You're my brother. That's all that matters right now. They talked for hours until Betty had refilled their coffee cups 4 times and the dinner rush had come and gone. Daniel learned about Robert's time in the military, the friends he'd lost, the nightmares that still woke him up at night. Robert learned about Daniel's life with the Chens, his time in law school, meeting his husband, building a career. You did good, Robert said. Better than good. Mom would be so proud. She'd be proud of you too, Daniel insisted. You're still here. You're still fighting. As the evening grew late, reality started to creep back in. Robert would have to go back to the streets soon. It was getting cold outside, and he'd need to find a safe place to sleep. The thought made Daniel's chest ache. Come home with me, Daniel said suddenly, just for tonight. We have a guest room. You can have a hot shower, a real bed. Robert shook his head. I can't ask that of you. You just met me again. I mean, really met me. You're not asking. I'm offering. Please, Bobby. Don't make me lose you again on the same day I found you. Something in Daniel's voice must have reached Robert, because his resistance crumbled. Okay, he said softly. Just for tonight. Daniel paid the bill, leaving Betty a generous tip. As they walked out into the cold Seattle night, he pulled out his phone to call his husband. This was going to take some explaining, but as he looked at Robert, his brother, walking beside him, Daniel knew that whatever happened next, whatever complications arose, this was right. Sometimes the people you're meant to find have been right in front of you all along, just waiting for you to see them. And sometimes, against all odds and reason, family finds its way back together. The drive to Daniel's house was quiet. Robert sat in the passenger seat of the clean, expensive car, looking out the window at the city lights. Daniel kept glancing over, still not quite believing this was real. His brother, his actual brother, who'd been sleeping on the streets just blocks from his office for who knows how long. You live in Queen Anne? Robert asked as they drove through the upscale neighborhood. Yeah. My husband and I bought the house 2 years ago. Daniel pulled into the driveway of a nice craftsman-style home with a small front yard. It's not huge, but it's home. Robert didn't move to get out. Listen, maybe this isn't such a good idea. I don't want to cause problems between you and your husband. He doesn't know me. Hell, you barely know me anymore. Trust me, Daniel said. If anyone will understand this, it's Kevin, come on. They walked up to the front door and Daniel noticed Robert hanging back, probably feeling self-conscious about his appearance. Before Daniel could unlock the door, it swung open. Kevin stood there, tall and kind-faced, wearing his usual after-work outfit of jeans and a sweater. Hey, Kevin said, looking between Daniel and Robert with concern and curiosity. Everything okay? Can we come in? Daniel asked. We need to talk. Once inside, Daniel asked Robert to wait in the living room while he quickly filled Kevin in on what had happened. He expected confusion, maybe even resistance. Instead, Kevin listened carefully and then walked straight to Robert. It's nice to meet you, Kevin said simply, extending his hand. I'm Kevin, you must have had quite a day. Robert shook his hand, looking overwhelmed. That's one way to put it. Are you hungry? Kevin asked. I made pasta earlier. We ate, Daniel said. But Robert could probably use a shower and some clean clothes. And a place to sleep that isn't a sidewalk. Of course. Kevin was already moving, falling into that caretaker mode that made him such a good nurse. Bathroom's upstairs, second door on the left. I'll find some clothes that might fit. Daniel, why don't you get some towels? 20 minutes later, Robert emerged from the bathroom looking like a different person. The grime was gone. His hair was clean and tied back neatly, and Kevin's clothes fit reasonably well. He looked younger somehow, less worn down, but his eyes still held that haunted look, the weight of years that couldn't be washed away with soap and water. They sat in the living room drinking tea that Kevin had made. Robert kept looking around like he couldn't quite believe where he was. Nice furniture, family photos on the walls, warmth and safety that probably felt like another world to him. "So you've been looking for Daniel all these years?" Kevin asked gently. "Every way I could think of," Robert said. "But once someone's adopted and the records are sealed, it's like they never existed. I tried social media when that became a thing. Searched every Daniel Sullivan in the Pacific Northwest. But he was Daniel Chen by then. I never had a chance." Daniel felt a wave of sadness wash over him. All those years they could have known each other, supported each other. "I thought about you," he admitted. "I had these memories, but they were so fuzzy. The Chens told me I'd had a brother, but nobody could tell me what happened to you. I figured you'd moved on, made your own life." "I tried," Robert said quietly. "I really did. But everything fell apart after the war, and then I couldn't get it back together." He paused. "I spent nights walking through Portland, Seattle, every city I ended up in, looking at faces. Part of me knew it was crazy, that I'd never just randomly see you, but I couldn't stop hoping. And then I walked past you this morning," Daniel said, shaking his head at the impossibility of it. "I knew," Robert said. "The second I saw your face, I knew it was you. You looked just like Mom did at your age. Same eyes, same way of walking. But I couldn't say anything." "And what was I supposed to do? Tell some successful lawyer that I was his homeless brother? You would have thought I was running a scam." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, processing the weight of it all. Finally, Kevin spoke up. "So what happens now?" It was the question they were all thinking, but nobody wanted to ask. Robert looked down at his hands, clean for the first time in days. "I should probably get back. I've got a spot under an overpass where I usually sleep." "It's out of the wind." "Absolutely not," Daniel said firmly. "You're not going back to the streets. Not tonight, not any night." "Daniel, you can't just fix this with good intentions," Robert said, his voice tired. "I've been down this road before. People want to help, and that's nice, but the reality is complicated. I've got problems. Real problems. PTSD, addiction issues I'm fighting every day, no job, no money, no real prospects. So we figure it out," Daniel insisted. "Together." "You don't understand," Robert said, his voice rising slightly. "I'm not some project you can take on. I'm a mess. I wake up screaming from nightmares. I've got panic attacks. Some days I can barely function. You've got this nice life, this beautiful home. I can't drag you down into my chaos." "You're not dragging me anywhere," Daniel said. "You're my brother. Do you know how many years I felt like something was missing? Like there was this hole in me I couldn't fill? The Chens were amazing and I love them, but there was always this part of my past I couldn't access. And now you're here. You're real. We found each other against impossible odds. I'm not letting you go." Robert's eyes filled with tears again. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you." "That's not how family works," Kevin said quietly. "It's not about deserving. It's about love." The words hung in the air. Robert covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. Daniel moved to sit beside him on the couch, putting an arm around his brother's shoulders. They sat like that for a long time, Robert crying years of grief and pain and relief, Daniel holding him like he wished he could have done 25 years ago. When Robert finally composed himself, he looked at Daniel with something that might have been hope. "I want to get better," he said. "I really do, but I've tried before and failed." "Then we'll try together," Daniel said. "And if we fail, we'll try again. That's what brothers do." They talked late into the night. Robert shared things he'd probably never told anyone, about the guilt he carried for not being able to keep them together, about the trauma from war, about the slow slide into homelessness that he couldn't stop. Daniel talked about the questions he'd always had, the sense of being adrift even within a loving family, the curiosity about where he came from. Kevin listened mostly, asking gentle questions, offering observations from his work in healthcare about resources that might help. He pulled up information on his laptop about VA services, PTSD treatment programs, housing assistance. "It's overwhelming," Robert said, looking at all the options. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "That's okay," Daniel said. "You don't have to know. We'll figure it out step by step." Around midnight, Kevin showed Robert to the guest room. It was small but comfortable, with a real bed and clean sheets. Robert stood in the doorway looking at it like it was a palace. "I don't remember the last time I slept in an actual bed," he admitted. "Well, now you will," Kevin said. "And tomorrow we'll start making plans." After Robert closed the door, Daniel and Kevin went to their own room. Daniel collapsed on the bed, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day. "Are you okay?" Kevin asked, lying down beside him. "I don't know," Daniel said honestly. "This morning I was just a guy running late to work. Tonight I have a brother who's been through hell and needs help I'm not sure I can give." "You don't have to give it alone," Kevin reminded him. "We'll do this together. And we'll call your parents tomorrow. They'll want to help too." Daniel thought about the Chens, about how they'd always encouraged him to explore his roots, to find answers to his questions. They're going to want to meet him. Of course they are. He's your brother. Kevin turned to face Daniel. "This is going to be hard, you know. Really hard. There will be setbacks and challenges and days when you want to give up." "I know," Daniel said. "But what's the alternative? Send him back to the streets? Pretend I never saw him? I can't do that." "I know you can't," Kevin said, smiling. "That's one of the reasons I love you. Your heart is too big to walk away from someone who needs you." They lay there in the darkness, holding hands, both thinking about the journey ahead. In the next room, Robert lay in a real bed for the first time in years, staring at the ceiling, barely able to believe his luck. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel something dangerous. Hope. The next morning, Daniel woke up early and went downstairs to find Robert already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He looked lost in thought, staring out the window at the morning light. "Couldn't sleep?" Daniel asked, pouring his own coffee. "Slept better than I have in years," Robert said. "But old habits die hard. I'm used to being up at dawn, making sure nobody took my stuff while I slept." They sat together in comfortable silence. Finally, Robert spoke. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything. For stopping, for listening, for bringing me here, for not giving up on me before we even started." "You're my brother," Daniel said. "Where else would you be?" And in that moment, despite all the challenges ahead, despite the long road to recovery that stretched before them, both brothers felt something they hadn't felt in a very long time. The sense of being found. The first week was the hardest. Daniel had imagined that helping Robert would be straightforward, a matter of making phone calls and filling out forms. He quickly learned how wrong he was. On Monday morning, they went to the VA hospital. The waiting room was packed with veterans, some looking tired, others angry, many appearing as lost as Robert. They waited for 3 hours just to speak with an intake coordinator, a busy woman who barely looked up from her computer screen as she asked Robert questions about his service record. "I don't have my discharge papers," Robert admitted. "I lost them years ago." The woman sighed like she'd heard this 1,000 times. "We'll need to request copies from the National Archives. That can take weeks, sometimes months." "Months." Daniel leaned forward. "Isn't there a faster way?" "Sir, we have procedures," she said tiredly. "Without proper documentation, we can't verify his service or process any benefits claims." They left with a stack of forms to fill out and no real help. Robert was quiet on the drive home, staring out the window. "I told you it was complicated," he said finally. "We'll figure it out," Daniel insisted, though he felt his own frustration building. How had the system gotten so impossible to navigate? That afternoon, they went to a mental health clinic that specialized in PTSD. The receptionist informed them that the first available appointment with a trauma specialist was in 2 months. Robert could go on a waiting list. Daniel wanted to argue, to explain that 2 months was too long, but the apologetic look on the receptionist's face told him she'd heard it all before. "There's a support group for veterans," she offered. "It meets Tuesday and Thursday evenings. That doesn't require an appointment. It was something, at least." Robert agreed to try it, though Daniel could see the doubt in his eyes. The week continued in a similar pattern. Every door they tried to open seemed to require paperwork they didn't have, or led to waiting lists that stretched on forever. Daniel spent hours on hold with various agencies, being transferred from one department to another, explaining Robert's situation over and over again. Kevin helped where he could, using his connections in healthcare to find faster routes to services. Daniel's law firm had resources too, and his boss, surprisingly supportive when Daniel explained the situation, connected him with an attorney who specialized in veterans' benefits. Through it all, Robert stayed in their guest room, adjusting to being indoors again. Some days were good. He'd help with cooking or yard work, happy to contribute in small ways. Other days were hard. Daniel would come home to find him sitting in the dark, lost in memories he couldn't escape. The nightmares were the worst. The first time Daniel heard Robert screaming in the middle of the night, he ran to the guest room in a panic. He found his brother sitting up in bed, drenched in sweat, shaking and confused about where he was. "I'm sorry," Robert kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I should leave. I shouldn't be here." "You're exactly where you should be," Daniel told him, though his heart ached at his brother's pain. Kevin, with his nursing experience, knew how to handle the aftermath of nightmares better than Daniel did. He'd sit with Robert, talking quietly until the panic subsided, never making him feel ashamed or broken. 2 weeks in, Daniel called his adoptive parents. He'd been putting it off, worried about how they'd react, but he should have known better. The Chens had always been open about his origins, never threatened by his desire to know his past. "Bring him over," his mother said immediately. "Tomorrow, for dinner." The next evening, Daniel and Robert drove to his parents' house in Bellevue. Robert was nervous, changing his shirt 3 times and asking repeatedly if he looked okay. "They're going to love you," Daniel assured him, though he was nervous too. His father opened the door before they could knock. Michael Chen was a small man with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at Robert for a long moment, then pulled him into a hug. "Welcome," he said simply. "We've wondered about you for years." Inside, Daniel's mother, Susan, had prepared a feast. She was tiny and energetic, moving around the kitchen with practiced ease. When she saw Robert, she stopped what she was doing and took his hands in hers. "You have his eyes," she said to Robert, meaning Daniel. "Same eyes as your mother in that photograph. Over dinner." Robert relaxed gradually as the Chens asked him questions not about his struggles, but about his memories of their mother, about what Daniel was like as a small child. They shared their own stories of raising Daniel, the funny moments and the challenges. "He was so quiet when he first came to us," Susan remembered. "Wouldn't talk much at all. It took months before he opened up." "He was quiet with me too at first," Robert said. "After our dad left, Danny barely spoke for weeks. But then one night he crawled into my bed during a thunderstorm and he whispered, 'Bobby, I'm scared.' That was the first thing he'd said in so long. After that, we were inseparable." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. He didn't remember that specific moment, but he believed it. The Chens were welcoming Robert not as a stranger, but as someone who'd been part of Daniel's story all along, a missing piece they'd always known existed. By the end of the evening, Michael was offering to help with Robert's VA paperwork, using his connections from his own work with nonprofit organizations. Susan had already invited Robert to their next family gathering. "You're not alone in this," Michael told Robert as they were leaving. "You have a family now. All of us." Robert cried on the drive home, but these were different tears than Daniel had seen before. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of finally feeling like he belonged somewhere. Progress came slowly but steadily. The attorney Daniel's boss had recommended managed to expedite Robert's discharge papers. With proper documentation, they could finally start processing his VA benefits. It wasn't much, but it was something. The support group turned out to be a lifeline. Robert started going twice a week, sometimes more. He'd come home and tell Daniel about the other veterans he was meeting, guys who understood what he'd been through in ways that civilians never could. For the first time, Robert seemed less alone with his demons. A month after that first meeting on the street, they finally got Robert in to see a trauma specialist. Dr. Williams was a veteran herself, and she didn't flinch at Robert's stories. She talked about treatment options, about the long road ahead, but also about the possibility of healing. "PTSD doesn't go away," she told them honestly, "but it can get better. With work and time and support, it can get a lot better." Robert committed to therapy twice a week. It was hard work, dragging up memories he'd tried to bury. Some days he came home exhausted, barely able to speak, but he kept going. Daniel learned to be patient, to celebrate small victories. The first night Robert slept through without nightmares. The day he laughed at something on TV, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep inside. The afternoon he told Daniel he'd gone a whole week without wanting a drink. "I'm not fixed," Robert said. "I'm not sure I'll ever be completely fixed, but I'm better." That's something. Housing was the next challenge. Robert couldn't stay in their guest room forever, they all knew that. He needed his own space, his own life, but finding affordable housing with no recent rental history and no steady income seemed impossible. That's when Kevin suggested transitional housing. He'd worked with a program that helped homeless veterans get back on their feet. The apartments were small but clean, and the program provided case management and job training. Robert applied and was accepted. The apartment wouldn't be available for another month, but knowing it was coming gave him something to work toward. In the meantime, Robert started volunteering at a food bank. It wasn't paid work, but it got him out of the house, gave him structure and purpose. The coordinator there, an older woman named Helen, took a liking to him. She started teaching him about food distribution logistics, inventory management, basic computer skills. "You're good at this," she told him one day. "Have you thought about applying for the paid position we're opening up next month?" Robert came home excited for the first time since Daniel had found him. "It's just entry level," he said. "Minimum wage. But it's something. It's a start." "It's more than a start," Daniel said. "It's a whole new beginning." The night before Robert was scheduled to move into his transitional housing apartment, they had dinner together, just the three of them. Daniel had made lasagna, one of the few things he could cook well. They sat around the table and Daniel raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. "To second chances," Kevin added. "To family," Robert said quietly. "To being found." They clinked glasses and Daniel looked at his brother, really looked at him. Robert had gained weight, his face filling out. The haunted look in his eyes hadn't disappeared completely, but it had faded. He smiled more often now. He talked about the future, about plans and possibilities. It had been 2 months since that rainy morning when Daniel had walked past a homeless man on the street. 2 months since his world had turned upside down. 2 months of struggle and frustration and small victories and setbacks. Looking at Robert now, eating lasagna and laughing at Kevin's bad jokes, Daniel knew every difficult moment had been worth it. They had a long way to go still. Robert's recovery wasn't complete and there would be hard days ahead. But they were facing it together, as brothers, as family. Later that night, after Kevin had gone to bed, Daniel and Robert sat on the back porch, looking at the stars. It was a clear night, cold but beautiful. "Thank you," Robert said. "For everything. For not giving up on me." "You're my brother," Daniel said. Giving up was never an option. Still, Robert insisted. "You saved my life. You know that, right? If you hadn't stopped that day, if you'd just walked past like everyone else, I don't think I'd be here." Daniel thought about that, about how easily he could have kept walking, about how one moment of listening to his instincts had changed everything. "Maybe we saved each other," he said. "I didn't realize how much I needed to find you, too." They sat in comfortable silence, two brothers who'd lost each other and found their way back, watching the stars and dreaming of better tomorrows. 1 year later, Daniel stood in the kitchen of his home, preparing Thanksgiving dinner with Kevin. The house smelled amazing, like turkey and stuffing and all the good things that made holidays feel special. Through the window he could see Robert in the backyard, throwing a ball for their dog, a rescue they'd adopted 3 months ago. Robert had named her Hope. "He looks good," Kevin said, following Daniel's gaze. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "He really does." Robert did look good. He'd filled out more, his face healthy instead of gaunt. His hair was shorter now, neatly trimmed. He wore clothes that fit properly, jeans and a flannel shirt that he'd bought with his own paycheck. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the way he carried himself, with a confidence that had been missing a year ago. The doorbell rang and Daniel went to answer it. His parents stood on the porch, Susan holding a pie and Michael carrying a bag of groceries. "Where's our other son?" Susan asked, hugging Daniel. She'd taken to calling Robert that, and it always made both brothers smile. "Out back with the dog," Daniel said. As if on cue, Robert came in through the back door, Hope bounding ahead of him. When he saw the Chens, his face lit up. Michael embraced him warmly, and Susan fussed over whether he was eating enough, the way mothers do. They gathered around the dining room table, the 4 of them plus Kevin, and for a moment before they started eating, Daniel just looked at everyone. His family. All of them together. "Should we go around and say what we're thankful for?" Kevin suggested. "I'll go first," Robert said. He looked down at his plate, then up at each person at the table. A year ago, I was sleeping on the street thinking my life was basically over. I'd given up on pretty much everything. And then Danny walked past me and everything changed. His voice got thick with emotion. I'm thankful for second chances. I'm thankful for this family that took me in when I had nothing. I'm thankful for every single day I get to be someone's brother again. Susan reached over and squeezed his hand. Michael nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. Kevin smiled warmly, and Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. The past year hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and struggles. Robert had relapsed once, disappearing for 3 days before Daniel found him at a bar downtown. They'd had hard conversations, moments of frustration and fear. There were still nights when the nightmares came, mornings when getting out of bed felt impossible for Robert. But there had been victories too. So many victories. Robert had gotten the job at the food bank, and after 6 months they'd promoted him to assistant coordinator. He was good at it, patient with the people who came through needing help, understanding in ways that someone who hadn't been there couldn't be. Helen, his boss, had told Daniel that Robert was the best hire they'd made in years. He'd moved into his transitional housing apartment and had done so well that last month, he'd signed a lease on his own place. It was a small studio, nothing fancy, but it was his. He'd invited Daniel and Kevin over for dinner the first night, proudly showing them around even though you could see the whole apartment from the doorway. The therapy was working. Dr. Williams had told Robert that he was one of her most committed patients. He went to his sessions religiously, did the homework she assigned, practiced the coping mechanisms she taught him. He'd even started attending a weekly meditation group, something he swore he'd never be into but now said helped him more than he'd expected. The support group had become a lifeline. Robert had made real friends there, other veterans who understood. They checked in on each other, grabbed coffee, went to baseball games together. One of them, a guy named Tom, had become Robert's sponsor for staying sober. They talked on the phone almost every day, but maybe the biggest change was the one Daniel saw when he looked in his brother's eyes. The haunted look was gone. In its place was something that looked like peace. Not perfect peace because life wasn't perfect, but a settled kind of peace that came from knowing you were going to be okay. After dinner, while Kevin and Susan were in the kitchen doing dishes and Michael was watching football, Daniel and Robert went out to the back porch. It had become their spot, the place where they had their best conversations. I got some news, Robert said, looking both excited and nervous. Yeah? Good news? I think so. The Veterans Outreach Center downtown asked if I'd be interested in working with them part-time. They want someone who's been through it, you know? Someone who can talk to homeless vets and help them navigate the system. Daniel felt pride swell in his chest. That's incredible. Are you going to do it? I want to, Robert said. I mean, if you think I'm ready. Why does it matter what I think? Because you've been right about everything else, Robert said simply. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You saw possibilities I couldn't see. So yeah, your opinion matters. Daniel put his hand on his brother's shoulder. I think you're more than ready. I think you're going to be amazing at it. You know the struggle, you know the system, and you care. That's everything. Robert smiled, that real smile that reached his eyes. Then I'm going to do it. I'm going to help people the way you helped me. They sat quietly for a moment watching Hope chase squirrels in the yard. Then Robert spoke again. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course. That day you walked past me, that wasn't the first time I'd seen you. Robert paused. I'd been on that corner for about a month. And I'd seen you walk by maybe a dozen times. You never looked at anyone. Just rushed past with your phone and your briefcase. And every time I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. What would I say? Hey, I think I'm your long-lost homeless brother? You would have thought I was crazy. Daniel felt chills run down his spine. But that day I stopped. That day something was different. You looked at me. Really looked at me. And I saw recognition in your eyes, even though you didn't know what you were recognizing. Robert shook his head. I still don't know what made you stop that day instead of all the other days. But I think about it all the time. One more day of walking past and maybe we never would have found each other. But we did, Daniel said. That's what matters. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped? Robert asked. Where I'd be now? Daniel thought about it. Sometimes. But then I remember that you're here now. You're healthy, you're sober, you have a job and an apartment and a future. That's real. The what-ifs don't matter. I wouldn't be alive, Robert said quietly. I need you to know that. I was at the end. I'd been thinking about ways to just stop the pain. And then you stopped. And you looked at me like I was human, not just another homeless guy to ignore. That changed something in me. Even before I knew who you were, you made me feel seen again. Daniel felt tears building. I'm glad I stopped. I'm glad I listened to that feeling that told me you were important. We got lucky, Robert said. So many people never get this chance. They stay lost. They die on the streets. They never find their way back to family. Which is why the work you're going to do at the outreach center matters so much, Daniel said. You can be for someone else what I was for you. You can help people find their way back. Robert nodded slowly. That's what I want. To take this second chance I've been given and use it to help others get their own second chances. They went back inside where the others were gathered in the living room. Kevin had put on music and Susan was showing Michael pictures on her phone. It was warm and comfortable, the kind of evening that felt like home. As the night went on, Daniel found himself watching Robert interact with everyone. The way he laughed at Michael's jokes. The way he listened carefully when Susan talked about her volunteer work. The way he and Kevin talked about the rescue dog they were thinking of fostering. He fit into their family like he'd always been there, like the missing piece had finally snapped into place. Around 10 o'clock, Robert said he needed to head home. He had to work early the next day, plus he was meeting his friend Tom for breakfast before his shift. At the door, Robert hugged everyone goodbye. When he got to Daniel, he held on a little longer. Thank you, he said, like he did almost every time they parted, for everything. You don't have to keep thanking me, Daniel said. Yeah, I do, because I never want to take this for granted. Any of this. Robert stepped back, looking Daniel in the eyes. You saved my life, little brother. I get to have a life because you stopped on that street. That deserves a lifetime of thank yous. After Robert left, Daniel stood on the porch watching his taillights disappear down the street. Kevin came out and wrapped an arm around him. You okay? Kevin asked. Better than okay, Daniel said. I was just thinking about how different everything is from a year ago. How one moment, one decision to stop and look at someone changed everything. You changed his life, Kevin said. He changed mine too, Daniel replied. I didn't realize how much I needed to find him. How incomplete I felt without knowing where I came from, who I came from. He gave me that. They went inside where Susan and Michael were gathering their things to leave. Before they walked out the door, Susan turned to Daniel. I'm proud of you, she said. Not just for helping Robert, but for following your heart. We raised you to be kind and compassionate, and you showed that in the best possible way. We couldn't have done it without you and Dad, Daniel said. You welcomed him without hesitation. He's your brother, Michael said simply. That made him our family too. After his parents left, Daniel and Kevin cleaned up the kitchen together. As they worked, Daniel thought about the journey that had brought them all here. The randomness of walking down a particular street on a particular morning. The courage it took to stop and look. The hard work of rebuilding a life and a relationship. The support of family who understood that love expands, it doesn't divide. Later, as they were getting ready for bed, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Robert. It was a picture he'd taken on his drive home, a selfie of him smiling with hope in the passenger seat. The text said simply, made it home. Love you, little brother. Daniel smiled and typed back, love you too. See you Sunday for breakfast. As he set his phone down and turned off the light, Daniel felt a sense of contentment he'd never quite experienced before. Life wasn't perfect. There would be more challenges ahead, more struggles for Robert to face, more days when the past would try to pull him back. But they'd face it together, as family, as brothers who'd found each other against impossible odds. Sometimes the people we need most are right in front of us, hiding in plain sight. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of really seeing someone to change two lives forever, and sometimes the family we lose finds its way back to us, bringing healing we didn't even know we needed.